Hello, and welcome to the lecture on alternative approaches in psychological research. So we're familiar with the approaches we've discussed so far. We've had our quasi experiments, our correlational studies, and our true experiments. Um, there are different types of approaches to research. Thus far, actually, we've mostly been focusing on quantitative research. So we have the different types of research that fall within that, the correlational, the quasi-experimental, and the true experimental. And we're using quantities to measure variables. So we're using numbers, essentially. So with our relationships with correlation, we have continuous variables, meaning they can have a decimal. And then when we're looking at D relationships, we're looking at the differences between groups. Oftentimes this can be, the two conditions that we've manipulated for our independent variable, we group those separately and compare the dependent variable between those. And that gives us a D relationship, comparing the exam scores in a quiet room versus a noisy room. So that is all quantitative research. And even though that's what we've been focusing up to this point, that is by far and away not the only type of research that is conducted in the field of psychology. We have qualitative research, not to be confused with quantitative. There's an L in here. Qualitative research is where we are asking participants questions, open-ended questions, where instead of saying, oh, how much do you agree on a scale of 1 to 5, or, rate your level of happiness 1 to 10, or, count how many times you do this, or what have you, qualitative research is more involved in letting the participants provide us answers. Oftentimes these are like interviews or just open-ended questions. How do you feel about online teaching or online learning? That would be an open-ended question, and that would be something that we would analyze through qualitative research methods. So we have a lot of different examples here. Interviewing large number of employees to look for common complaints and issues. So you can just provide like, oh, what are some of the common complaints that you have? But if you have employees provide those to you, then you won't have to worry about it. Just a moment. So you can't really ask or you can't really provide complaints that employees have. It's better if you just give them to you. There might be things that you don't know. That's the interesting thing about qualitative research. There could be responses that you, the researcher, didn't even think of. Part of the Kubler-Ross model of grief, that was obtained through starting with qualitative research, interviewing people with illnesses, terminal illnesses, to identify the patterns that they use to cope with the grief and the loss and the process of dying. So when we, Amelia, excuse me, when we are analyzing qualitative research, we can count the trends. So we can look at the common themes, like, for instance, the Kubler-Ross model. There might be a lot of anger. If you're not familiar with it, it's the 5 stages of grief, where it is, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Well, maybe some of the common themes they found must have been anger. I'm angry, or I'm pissed off about this happening, or I'm trying to do anything I can to make it, not happen to me. Like, I will do anything. That could have been a common theme. That would be bargaining. Or, I'm supremely depressed. I don't want my life to end, or what have you. Sorry, this is taking such a dark route, but it's qualitative research. But the interviews, we can look at and count the trends, or even code the responses to see how often they say things like, I feel helpless, I feel helpless. Or if you're looking in the anger realm, you can count for things like, I just want to, look for anger words, like I'm pissed off, or, I'm angry, I want to break shit. I don't know. I want to scream at the top of my lungs. Things like that. So you look for, with qualitative research, it provides you a lot of information. However, the analysis is a lot different. So instead of just plugging it into, a t-test or, finding equals correlation on, or equals Pearson on Excel, this involves the researchers to have transcripts and read over the interviews and read over the open-ended question responses and pick out the themes that they find. So it's really interesting research, but it is a lot different in terms of the analysis. A lot more time consuming as well if if you don't know what you're doing. So different types of quantitative research. So we talked about qualitative research that deals with open-ended questions and interviews and coding those responses, looking over transcripts and kind of finding common themes. But now let's get back to quantitative research. So for our class, for our research, we typically want to have a pretty decent sample size. We want to have a lot of people, as many people as we can involved in the study, so we can really be more firm and confident in if we have statistical significance. Okay, our sample size is large enough to where this is probably a relationship that exists in the population. But there is research that deals with a single subject, so just one participant. And so while the sample size is incredibly small, a small group of people, like one person, or even like a small group of 4 or 5 or something, what you're doing instead of, taking a one shot, like, oh, I'm going to give you an exam once, one time you're going to take in a loud condition, and then my other half of participants are going to take in a quiet condition. And that's it. That's all we do. You only take one test, one time at one point in your life, and then we're good, at least for my study. But with single subject research, we're testing them multiple times. So it's not just one and done, because that'd be really poor. That would be really poor research methods if we had a small sample size and we only tested once. That only gives us a small bit of information, a small subset of data, just that one exam that they took one time, those 4 people or whatever. But with excuse me, with single subject research, we look at them over the course of time, over over a period of longer periods of time. And with that, we're able to see, okay, so we might have a small sample size, but we have hundreds of points of data for them. So yes, we have a small sample size, but our data is still large. We still have obtained a lot of information from these participants. Now, this is different than a case study. What a case study is that is an in-depth examination of a particular case or of a person. So you might have heard of HM with his short-term and long-term memory. A lot of memory studies can be case studies. I believe there was Clive, I forget his last name right now, but I believe he's a British gentleman. He's an older man. And he only remembers like 30 seconds at a time. So he's been married to his wife for like 30, 40 plus years, and he recognizes her. And every time she enters the room, he's excited. Even if she went to get a cup of water and come back, he's excited like he hasn't seen her in a long time. So he remembers who she is, and he remembers that he loves her and he sees her and he's like, oh my God, my love. But when it comes to, she can tell him something, leave the room, come back, or not even leave the room. She could tell him something, and within the course of the sentence or in the same conversation, he won't remember. So examining that would be a case study. Baby Albert, if you've heard of Baby Albert, it's an infamous case where he was tested. This child was exposed to loud noises in response to like a small white rat, or I think it was a rat or a mouse or something, but it was a small, non-threatening little animal. And every time he would see it, there would be like a loud banging right behind this little kid's head. And when I say baby, I do mean baby. He was an infant. So every time he was being conditioned to fear this small white rat. And eventually that kind of branched out to other small animals for baby Albert. It was like small bunnies, etc., just small rat-like size creatures where he was afraid of them. These are case studies. They're in depth indeed, but since it's only looking at one person, it has a major lack of internal and external validity. Keep in mind that internal validity is keeping the conditions of an experiment the same, and external validity is how well we can generalize that to everyone else outside of this. So while it does have a lot of in-depth information, in actuality, that really best fits the person that it's looking at. So it really best fits baby Albert, or it best fits Clive, the memory loss gentleman. Memory loss is something that's interesting, but it varies in case to case, depending on, if you have some sort of brain injury, even like shifting a sort of brain trauma, like 0.5 millimeter or like a centimeter over in your head, that's going to drastically alter your memory. That's going to drastically alter the effects that whatever that brain damage does to your head, and does to your thinking, does to your memory, does to your life. You might be familiar with Phineas Gage, the gentleman who got a railroad spike shunted through his face. Well, that was certainly a case study where, he was a kind, mild-mannered gentleman before, but then he has a railroad spike shoved through his frontal lobe of his brain. And I mean, granted, anyone would probably be a little pissed about that. But after that instance, his entire personality changed. He was more irritable. He was rude. He just spoke his mind. He didn't really filter it. And so that was a case study. And that gave us information about, what does the frontal lobe do? But we're still not entirely sure. A lot of the things we know about how the brain works, like what function does what in the brain, a lot of that is achieved through case studies. And it actually requires more in-depth studies in order for us to get more information on that. So case studies can provide us an idea, similar to how qualitative research kind of gives us like, ooh, that's something I didn't think of before. When I gave this questionnaire, or when I interviewed my workers and they said that they hated the fact that we don't have a water cooler, that's not something I mentioned, or hated the fact that they don't get adequate compensation for their work. Wow, that's not something I thought of as a CEO of this company. Who'd have thought people need to eat and live and, have enough money to pay things that they need to use to eat and live, but that's ridiculous. But anyway, case studies, in the same sense of qualitative research, kind of gives us a direction to go in terms of research. So, oh, wow, this guy got a railroad spike through his frontal lobe, and then his personality changed. Oh, it seems like the frontal lobe might be responsible for some aspects of personality. Let's do more research to follow up on that. Let's do research that does not lack internal and external validity. Let's do something that we can generalize to larger groups of people. So with single subject, obviously case studies and single subject research require either one or small groups of people. When we examine people more closely, individually, we can see things that might be lost. Oftentimes, single subject research is used in applied behavior analysis. It's almost, I don't want to say almost exclusively. I'm not an expert in that field, so I'm not going to go about telling them how they do their stuff. But they will oftentimes use single subject research because they're interested in changing behaviors. If you know much about applied behavior analysis, I know we have an ABA program that's excellent at Fresno State. A lot of times it's people that are in the ABA program will intern or work for places that are responsible for some sort of behavioral change. So they might work with children with autism or children on the developmental spectrum, where they have to teach them behaviors and limit behaviors that are harmful to them. So teach them more social functioning behaviors, things that are more, societally accepted, for lack of a better term, kind of give them that social, those social norms, teach them social norms through ABA, through applied behavioral analysis, and also reduce behaviors. Like sometimes if children on the autistic spectrum want attention, they might be hitting their head against a wall. Now they're not really thinking, gee, this hurts. They might be more thinking, I want attention. In fact, they might even not be thinking that exactly. But in terms of getting attention, things that ABA can do is, okay, so they are hitting their head. That is a behavior we want to limit. We want to extinguish that behavior. So let's work on things to actually do that. Now, like I said, I am not an expert in ABA. I know about it, but in terms of like the nitty gritty of what they do, you'd best talk to someone in the psych department that is a professional in this field. So yeah, you want more information, I'm not the person to go to. I can lead you to the people to go to, but I am not the one. Anyway, so we're in ABA, they're interested though in having strict experimental design principles. One of the concepts of ABA is that, hey, you know, it's not using cognitive functions, or we're not really focusing on the cognitive aspect of life because we can't experimentally test that. So where I've talked about self-report questionnaires and self-report measures of variables, ABA isn't really as concerned with that because there's always a margin of error for that. It's always, it's not entirely empirical because we can't observe how you think about something. We can't observe your thoughts. We can observe your behaviors that might be attributed to your thoughts, but with ABA, they focus on the empirical. They focus on what I see in front of me. I see you slamming your head against the wall, or I see you sitting down in your seat. Good, that behavior needs to be reinforced, or what have you. So different types of, there are different types of designs when it comes to single subject research. A reversal design is something that is commonly used in ABA, where they will have like two conditions, A and B, and they'll kind of go back and forth. So they might start with A, which could be like a control or like no sort of, excuse me, manipulation, have manipulation at B, and then go back to A and see how the changes in the baseline, if there's any changes to the baseline. And I'll go into more detail about that. But we're familiar with how graphs look in quantitative research and in the general, you know, multi-subject research that we've been discussing. You know, we know what a scatter plot of a correlation looks like. We know what a graph that depicts a D relationship looks like if we're looking at independent variables. But it's a little different with single subject research. It's still scatter plotty, but in terms of just what it's showing you, what it's telling you, that is what changes. Each point could be the number of times that, you know, if you're trying to get someone to stop banging their head against a wall, each time, you know, maybe maybe group A is, you know, the number of times that they are, you know, sitting in their seat quietly, or the number of times that they are, you know, seeking attention through other methods. And then condition B can be some sort of treatment, some type of behavioral intervention that they enact in order to prevent them from banging their head against the wall, or in order to increase the behavior of sitting in their seat and you know, paying attention or whatever. And then they go back to baseline and see, hey, you know, we know the baseline of when there's no treatment. Let's throw in a treatment. Now let's take it away and see what that looks like. See how their baseline has changed. So steady state is where researchers will test a participant in the same condition until they get a fairly consistent baseline. So you see in the previous example, it kind of hops up and down like boom, 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 boom. Steady state, they're testing a participant in the same condition long enough until those responses tend to stay fairly consistent. So they have a good idea of where that behavior tends to lie. This helps to reduce any kind of noise in the data. And it also kind of calls to regression to the mean. Now, if you remember my discussion about regression to the mean, that is where, you know, for example, you know, the Madden curse, where, oh my God, you know, after a football player is on the cover of Madden, the following season, he sucks, you know, he gets sacked a million times, or he throws interceptions, or he gets no touchdowns, or like, He just has a really crappy season after he's on the cover of Madden, the Madden video game. Must be the curse then. Must be because of the damn curse of being on that game. Actually, no, it's a regression to the mean, meaning that, you know, he might have a steady state of, you know, maybe he throws 20 touchdowns, or maybe he rushes for 900 yards every season, or whatever. He might have a steady state of, over the course of his career, he's averaged about this much. That would be his steady state. Then out of nowhere, he has a super good season. You know, he's the MVP. He does fantastic. People are like, whoa, where did he come from? That was amazing. Let's put him on the cover. And rightfully so. He had a fantastic season. So he has this whoop in terms of his numbers, his stats. So he's been going to steady in his career. And then he has this high point. But regression to the mean states, you're going to have you might not have the best season following that. You either might regress back to your average, to your normal, or you might even dip a little bit below that. But essentially, a steady state would be that foundation of, yeah, normally he rushes for 900 yards, or normally he throws, you know, maybe normally he throws 150 strikeouts, or like whatever, although that's still pretty good. But it isn't until he, you know, has this gigantic season where he has this fantastic stats all around, and then he'll go back to, you know, his normal. That is regression to the mean. That's the purpose of steady state. So we don't rely on the Madden NFL season as his norm, but rather before that. Okay, so reversal design. I showed you a picture or a graph depicting reversal design. This is also called an ABA design, which I think is funny because it's used a lot in ABA. It could be because it's named after applied behavioral analysis, or it could be because it's condition A and then condition B and then condition A again. Ooh, you decide. But it kind of works both ways. Excuse me. So, like I said, this is about how you see how the dependent variable is changed when you have this alternation between the control or the baseline. Remember that steady state that I mentioned, getting that, okay, they're consistent normal numbers, the consistent normal amounts of time they display this behavior. Excuse me, my goodness. Then we'll throw in our treatment, whatever that may be, and that will change depending on what the behavior they're trying to reinforce or extinguish is. And then they'll check the baseline again. So they'll measure how many times they do something just normally, just in real life. Then they'll apply some sort of treatment and measure the amount of times they display that behavior again. And then they'll go back to baseline, remove the treatment, and see how that changes their steady state. So they do this multiple times. They don't just do ABA, you know, control, treatment, control again. They'll do AB, 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 AB. I mean, I don't know how many times. It would just really depend, but they will do this several times, more than, you know, the 3 times. So then they can get a more solid understanding of, okay, how does it change? You know, how does this behavior change when we're constantly shifting the treatment and then going back to the control, going back to baseline? So if the baseline improves every time after they do this treatment, they can say, hey, you know, this is probably working. You know, whatever we've set up is probably working. But just like how they would test multiple times for steady state to get that consistent baseline, to kind of get that regression to the mean and reduce any of those Madden NFL seasons, they do the same thing for the alternation between baseline treatment, baseline treatment, baseline treatment. Because maybe, you know, if they do it once after the treatment, they're like, oh my God, that was amazing. Stop here. We don't need to do anymore. We're done. This works. It's $1 million idea. But, you know, you do it a few more times and maybe it's not as effective as you thought, because it's like, oh, well, just that first time was great, but it's not really consistent. So they test multiple times to avoid that regression to the mean, to avoid sticking with the Madden NFL season as this is how it always is. You always got to keep testing because chances are you're going to have that baseline. So here's a reversal design. with a little more examples. So here's that baseline of the percentage of time studying. And then we provide the participants with positive attention. Oh, you're doing a great job studying, or, you know, some positive affirmation, what have you. And then we take it away and see the average amount of the percentage of time they spend studying. And then we give positive attention again. So with ABA, there's also multiple baseline, where you have participants introduced to treatment at different times. So maybe some, like in this first graph up here, it starts relatively early within the first few sessions. Down here, you'll see it starts right in the middle, so they have the same amount of time in baseline as they do with the treatment. And then down here, this baseline is the large, they're spending a majority of time in baseline and then treatment. Now there's reasons why there are multiple baselines. It could be that if we remove the treatment, like with the ABA design, where we, you know, have the baseline, do the treatment, and then remove it and measure the baseline again, remove the treatment. Sometimes that's not possible. It could be that treatment removal of it could be unethical. Like when I mentioned about, you know, the hitting your head behavior, or some sort of self-harm. That could even be something, you know, people who are known as cutters that would consistently, you know, cut their body in order to kind of escape the pain by being in control of their own pain. Removing any treatment to reduce self-harm behavior could be seen as unethical, because, hey, you know, it could work, but let's just take it away. Keep hurting yourself, girl. Like, yeah, not entirely ethical. So there are different reasons why we have multiple baseline, and it's just to kind of get a full picture of, all right, so what happens when we just, you know, have it at different times. This kind of provides us something that the ABA, this is the best way with removing unethical research that we can, or unethical treatments. This is kind of how we establish that, well, how does behavior change with this baseline and treatment condition? So that is our lecture on alternative approaches. If you are interested in ABA, if you found that lecture to be interesting, granted, I certainly did not do it justice. Like I said, there are many professors at Fresno State that work in the ABA program. There's a master's degree. You can earn a master's degree in ABA at Fresno State. So we have plenty of capable and knowledgeable people that on the subject. So if there's anything that you found interesting or want to know more information on, go ahead and reach out to me, and I can let you know of the professors that can give you that information, or even look it up yourself. You know, we have the Psych info, or the Department of Psychology website for Fresno State. Check that out and see who has, you know, ABA by their name. You know, see what research interests you. But that's just a reminder that there are alternative approaches in research. It's not all correlation and Pearson's R and Cohen's D. There are variations of that. So psychological research is an interesting thing. It's a very, you know, you can get a lot of information, and there's a lot of ways we can get that. So I hope you found this lecture interesting. And as per usual, if you have any questions, never hesitate to contact me through email, Canvas, or office hours. But until then, have a good week, and like and subscribe.